Okay, welcome back, everyone. So last time we talked about mean squared error, statistical mean squared error, and we derived decomposition into three terms: irreducible error, squared bias, and variance. And then we talked quite a bit about how to interpret bias and variance in the context of this polynomial demo. And then we said that these bias variance ideas are a bit more general than that. Even though we focus on mean squared error, you can see them show up in many other losses, and so on. And one last thing to talk about is another way that bias and variance shows up very commonly. You may have seen this in some prior statistics courses, is the bias and variance of the sample estimators. And the sample estimators, these are the same ones we talked about back in Unit 2, the sample mean, sample variance. So we already actually briefly mentioned something about unbiasedness of the variance estimate. So now we're going to come back and we have the tools to describe exactly what we meant by that. So here's the setup. There's some random variable, capital Z, and this random variable happens to have a mean of mu and a variance of V. Okay, but we don't actually know that. Let's say that what we observe are n realizations of this random variable, so numbers zi, where I goes from 1 to n. And from these, our goal is to estimate mu and V. Okay, so this is a common thing, especially this. You want to find, like, you have a bunch of samples and you want to find their average, right? So then you might ask the question, well, is my average estimate, the one that we talked about before, just empirical average, sample average, is that good in the sense of being unbiased? Okay, so now we can answer that question. So to really think about this, we need to actually think about these as random. I'll say treat as random. So this is the idea. Random. Okay. If you have this random variable, capital Z, and you have some deterministic samples or realizations of it, we can't really say anything about that particular set of samples. It could be like way off the mean. It could be exactly on the mean. You just don't know. Anything is possible, right? So in order to really say something more generally about this averaging procedure, we need to say, well, what happens, usually or on average or in probability or something that kind of acknowledges that even this should be treated as random. And so to do that, we think of, maybe practically speaking, doing many experiments where in one experiment we have these n samples and we compute this sample mean. And then we repeat the experiment with n new samples and we compute a new sample mean. And we do this many, many, many times. And then we ask, over those many, many, many times, are the sample means that I got on average correct? Or are they biased above or below on average? So in order to do that, we need to treat even these realizations as random. Okay. So I hope it's not confusing. In these notes, I'm using little zi, which suggests that maybe they would be deterministic, but actually we want to think about them as random now. And if these little zi's are random, then the sample mean z bar is also random. And because it's random, we can do something like compute the statistical average, the expectation of that random quantity. Okay, so this is actually, all the details are in this handout, which you can click on this link. It's on the main course GitHub repository. I'm not going to go into the derivation, just because I'm running a little bit behind with these lectures. But it's easy to show, you guys could all do this, that if you look at the statistical average of the sample mean, that it matches the truth. It matches the true statistical mean of Z. In other words, the sample mean gives us an unbiased estimate of the statistical mean. And that's a great thing. And this is one of the reasons why it is so commonly used. You know that the sample mean you get from any n realizations is not going to be equal to the true statistical mean, but you know that it's not like systematically lower or greater than the true mean mu. Does that idea make sense? Okay, so that's the sample mean. But as we know, that's just what happens on average. So you might also want to know the next simplest statistic, which is how much does z bar deviate from its mean or deviate from mu? And that is the variance. So when we look at the variance of this random variable z, we find that it takes on the value v, which is the true variance, divided by n, which is the number of samples that we used in our average. Okay, and so this is also a very intuitive result. So like if my random variable z is itself has a very high variance, then when I average my samples, I expect that that average also has a high variance. So that is reflected in the fact that this variance is directly proportional to v. Okay, this is the variance in the sample mean estimate. This v is the variance in the original random variable. But there's another interesting thing here, which is also probably what you would expect, that as you collect and average more samples n, the deviation of z bar from the mean shrinks. So this is v over n. So if I double the number of samples that I use in my average, my average gets a lot closer to the true average. It gets twice as close to the true average. Okay, so this is hopefully intuitive too. And finally, we saw this exactly when we looked at the standard error. If you remember, standard error we said is the typical way to compute these error bars, and it's the error bars that we compute when we analyze the sample mean. And now you notice that this quantity, if you take the square root of this, that is exactly the standard error that we defined. Okay, so now we have an explanation for why did we compute the standard error as square root v over n. Right? This thing was square root v over n. Why did we compute the error bars that way? Because that tells us you square that, that's exactly the variance of the sample mean estimator. Okay. So that explains how and why we computed standard error that way. Okay, so hopefully this ties a few things together, namely the difference between the sample mean and the statistical mean, why simple averaging is good, and the fact that simple averages get better as you collect more samples and use them in that average. Okay, so those are all the things we can conclude from this short analysis here of the sample mean. Any questions on that? Okay, now we have this random variable that is on average mu, but that it also deviates from its average according to this variance v. And let's suppose that our goal is to actually also estimate this number v. So we also saw a way of doing that back in Unit 2. It was the sample variance. So the sample variance, let me be consistent here. The sample variance we defined as you take your sample zi, you subtract your sample mean, this one, from each one, and then you square all those errors or those deviances, and then you average them. But if you remember, I briefly mentioned that sometimes people use 1 over n and sometimes they use 1 over n minus 1. And now I can explain what I meant by that. So again, we'll think of all these zi's now as random, and we'll also think of z bar as random, which means that this sample variance estimator we can also think of as random. And so we can see what is that thing on average. If I do many, many experiments where I try to estimate v this way, I get all these different versions of SCZ and I look at them on average, I will actually find that this is systematically a little bit lower than v. So in particular, it's n minus 1 over n times v. So when n is very large, it's just a tiny bit less than v. We don't really care about it. But if n is smaller, let's say n is like, 2. Well, then this ratio is 1/2, right? So that's a lot smaller than the true v. So the bias of this sample variance estimator is much more pronounced when you are using few samples for your average. And in those cases, you might say, I don't like the sample variance estimator because it's just systematically telling me something that's smaller than my true variance. So there's an easy correction to this, is instead of using 1 over n here, you use 1 over n minus 1, and that is exactly what we have over here. And it's not hard to see that this 1 over n minus 1 will cancel this term, and finally, the result is that this new estimator, scaled in a slightly different way, is unbiased. So if you really want an unbiased estimate of your variance, you should not use the 1 over n averaging, you should use 1 over n minus 1 averaging. And if n is small, this will make a big effect. If n is large, it won't really have that much of an effect, but technically speaking, it will give you that unbiased estimate. Okay. So again, our goal is to estimate the variance of this random variable by using this sample variance procedure that we saw before, and now we're able to analyze it and see that it is systematically giving us answers that are smaller than the truth, but we have a fix that gives us unbiased answers. So they are on average correct. Okay, is this clear? Any questions on this? Is this making sense? These are really important ideas, I think, for machine learning and stuff. So please don't hesitate to ask questions if you have any. Okay, so now to make the story even a little bit more interesting, you might say, okay, so we have this biased estimate and we have an unbiased estimate. So the unbiased estimate is better, right? It's just like overall better. Well, the answer is not exactly. It really depends what you want. If you really care about your answer being unbiased, then yes, this is the one to use. But if you care that your estimate, one of these two numbers, is closest to the truth in mean squared, meaning that it minimizes the mean squared error between itself and the truth, it turns out that if you make the assumption that the z's are Gaussian, which is something you don't need to do for this, but to make the derivation tractable, if you also assume you have Gaussian z's, then you can actually derive the mean squared error of this estimate and this estimate. And what's interesting is that the biased one gives you a smaller mean squared error than the unbiased one. Okay, so here again, you have to ask the question, what do you want? If you really care about getting something closest to the truth in the mean square sense, you actually want to use the biased one. If you want to use something that is just unbiased, that you can trust in that way, you have to put up with a larger mean squared error. Just how this works. And these properties, you see these a lot in statistics and machine learning. You sometimes will trade bias for variance. This is another example of the bias-variance trade-off. In terms of mean squared error, it's not the right thing to focus fully on bias. We know that mean squared error is bias squared plus variance. And so here, this actually gives us a better trade-off in terms of mean squared error. Okay, so all the details are in this handout if you want to see them. The kind of derivations that are there are similar to what you find in the homework, similar to what could show up on exams. So in that sense, if you're looking for more material, more examples of that form, that would be another reason to look at that handout. Okay. Any questions at all on these ideas? Great. Okay. So we're almost done then. We just essentially need to motivate the fact that we're not done talking about these issues, that we need to go a little bit deeper. And So just to kind of review what we've been looking at in this chapter, we have been choosing among these nested models that look like this. Do we use x1, or do we use both x1 and x2, or do we use x1, x2, and x3, and so on? And that is important, to be able to choose among those different models. But sometimes you might say, well, why can't I do something like, for example, use x1 and x3, but not x2? Okay, so once you start thinking that way, what you're really talking about then is no longer just model order selection, but what we call feature selection, or choosing which subset of features to use for predicting y. For example, you might notice that some of these features are just very noisy. They contain almost no information about the target y. So if you use them for prediction, they will only make your predictions more noisy. They won't actually make them closer to the truth. So that is a motivation to just ignore them completely. And in terms of feature selection, you'd say, I'm going to select, let's say, x1 and x3 to use, but I'm going to not select x2. I'm going to suppress x2. Make sure that my estimate is not computed based on x2 at all, because x2 is only going to distract me. Okay. So feature selection is the subject of the next unit. But just before we get there, the main challenge of feature selection is computational. Let's say we have D features total. So there's D of these. How many different subsets do we have to choose between? Does anybody see how to think about this? Let's use Wes Water Street here. So I'll give you a hint, Wes. What if we think about the choice to use every feature as a binary number, 0 or 1? So when we talk about feature selection, we're talking about choosing one of a binary string of length D. Right? So if I think